Welcome back, everyone. I'm hoping everyone had a wonderful community meal. Right now, we're going to be having a panel on unseen doors, Muslim journeys through altered states and ancestral memory. This panel opens a space rarely made visible where Muslim identity, ancestral longing, and psychedelic experience intersect. In a conversation rooted in vulnerability and reverence, panelists share personal stories of navigating conservative upbringings, self-policing, and spiritual disconnection, and how through altered states and sacred medicines, they begin to reclaim tenderness, presence, and spiritual spaciousness. Our panelists include Muhammad Igal, Jamal Hashi, and Brooke Swanson. So I welcome our panelists to the stage. Thank you.
We can go ahead and get started. My name is Muhammad. This is
Brooke.
We'll pass around the mic. You got your own? Yeah, that makes sense. I'll be the moderator today. I don't have the same voice as Penny, but I'll do my best. So today's topic, why are we here? And it is to, first of all, thanks for inviting us and having us here at this amazing event where we will discuss many topics relating to the use of psychedelics and such. And I'm very happy to know that something like this exists in Minnesota, and that we're such, conscious and forward-thinking people. And today's panel, I guess the purpose, like Penny said, is to add another layer to this and see how other people are using these kinds of, what's the history and relations of psychedelics in other cultures, how do they view it, opportunities and intersection, and then sharing our experience, what we know, our lived experience to add, bring some perspective. So with that, I want to start with welcoming the rest of the panel here and giving everybody a chance to do introductions, starting with, I think we can go now from Rume.
Yeah. Hello. Brief intro. Let's see. I was not born in America. I was born in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, which is a very conservative Muslim nation. But we moved out here when I was really young and then kind of moved around. Ended up in Minnesota in the early 2000s. And yeah, just kind of grew up in a very tight-knit Somali community out here. It's big to an extent. There's a lot of us, it feels like, but everything's just very much so, very connected. And yeah, I stayed out here for some years, and then I eventually had to move. Went down to Chicago, and that's where I started my journey with psychedelics. And yeah, I'll speak on that a little bit more, I think, after everyone gives their intros.
So my name is Brooke. I would say my experience is a little different from these guys. I was not born a Muslim. I've been Muslim for about 2 years now. I grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, and I would say I've had a little bit of the opposite experience where I found psychedelics before I found my path to God. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for now.
And then pretty similar to Rume, I was born in Kenya. At least I think that's what my parents tell me, but you never know. These African parents, they tell all kinds of stories, they didn't have feet when they went to school and such. So I immigrated to America, and so what happens when you have multiple identities? I'm the oldest of 6, and I consider myself American Somali, not Somali American. We can talk about that later. And religion, and then we had 9/11. I was 3 years old when I remember 9/11 happened. I saw it on TV. The school assistant lady with this really long hair, you don't see that kind of hair no more, picked me up when I was a kid, and I was like, what is that? I thought it was a movie. And from there, my identity was impacted because you just couldn't be, you had to be conscious you're Muslim. You got your Muslim wake-up call. And then beyond that, post-2011, I was kind of active with Occupy Wall Street. It's like I was conscious of my class, work. So a lot of times in our life, our identity changes. So you're navigating your identity. You're figuring out who am I, what am I, what's my relation to other people. The basic questions about that life is all about. And so that's where I think psychedelic comes in because it's a tool to get you on a path to figure out identity and to reveal something beyond this plane of existence. So that's what motivated me to explore that path, because you're always wondering, what are you? In the Somali community, and I'll go into this later, but just like most immigrant communities, the older ones view the kids more American. I'll give you an example. So when we were kids, sometimes we'd take advantage of some back-to-school program where they give out free backpacks. We get in line, I'm with my aunt, and then they ask you, how many people in your family? And I say 4. She slaps me. She said, tell them 10. And then we get home, I was like, what did I do wrong? I told the truth. She said, you American. But that's because like you're supposed to try to get more. But essentially, that highlights the difference in identity. Always, right? You're always trying to figure out who are you, and you got your foot in multiple doors. Beyond that, I think that's it for intro, so we can just move on to the next thing. Let's talk about, for the panelists, I want to ask you guys about personal use. Can you speak on that?
I can, yeah. So I kind of found it ultimately by accident. It was a friend had introduced it to me, specifically mushrooms and acid, LSD, in which it was like back-to-back weekends of just like an awakening. When I was like young, 20, I was just young, and I was like, at that point, my relationship with God and like religion in general had become so negative and shame-based that I was like, whatever, I don't care. I was living just kind of very much how Mahmoud was referring to, just like kind of like identity drifting. I was like, I don't really relate to being in the Muslim community the way that I was raised. There was just absolutely no space for, it felt like, questions. If you had doubt, it was coming from the devil, which is just not really fair if you're a naturally curious person. I feel like it's very limiting. But yeah, I think my first experience that I felt like reality might not be exactly what I've been told was off of LSD. I could just, really ultimately it comes down to the visuals where I was like, I don't know what's happening. I can't trust my eyes. It feels like there's just so much shifting around. I was listening also to like Kanye's like graduation album, and I could see the music. Ultimately, all of it, I was like, I don't know what's real anymore. I've lost my concept of reality a little bit. And then from there, I got introduced to mushrooms. And when I was first introduced to it, it wasn't really introduced as like a medicine. I'm not sure how it was for you all, but for me, it was just like, if you do this, it's gonna be a good time. And it was rough. It was rough. I wish I could say it was just pure fun. I just had ultimately what felt like a really intense, and I've never had an experience like that since. It's been like almost a decade. I've never had an experience that was that strong. No matter how much I might eat now, it's just not the same difference. But where I was able to like experience God, I felt like for the first time in a very long time at that point. And I could just see how much shame and guilt was driving a lot of my actions constantly, every day. Like it's in my subconscious, but thanks to the mushrooms, it came to the forefront of my mind. It's like, hey, these are your behaviors, and this is kind of where it stems from. And that was kind of, it was an experience. It was quite an experience. It was good to be able to know, though, that it was real, because I feel like even if I wasn't aware that I was acting from my subconscious mind, I still was. So it was really useful as a medicine for me in that sense, to be able to have that awareness, but then also find at the same time immediate acceptance, where it was like, you've been doing this is how you've been moving, it's not your fault, you're good, you're still held in like unconditional love. And I feel like that's kind of been my experience with psychedelics since then. It's anytime that I engage, it's still that same feeling of insights, awareness. Also, don't forget, you're not a bad person. And that's kind of, I'm like, wow, that's a pretty cool God. I like that. Yeah.
So, roommate, my takeaway from that was you started recreational use, and then you accidentally or somehow found the other benefits, healing, acceptance, and that's kind of what your primary use is now, not really recreational.
Yeah, yep.
So I think in the audience too, a lot of people who have delved into it, was that your experience? Just think about that. Did you come in using it, having one use for it, and then realize, wow, this is the other use? Or how many people probably started off more intentional and saying, through, I don't know, through medicinal use and such? Did it go that way, or was it more the recreational? And then, so yeah. And then Brooke, go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I would say my first time was definitely with LSD, and I was at a music festival and just looking to have fun, and turned out to give me more anxiety than it did fun. And then I would say my big moment with psychedelics was I was a sophomore in nursing school. I wanted to try mushrooms for the first time, and I went to the woods camping with my friends and had this huge shift in consciousness, and was like, I just realized I was living my life in a way that society told me to live, and I just hadn't seen outside of that box. And I went home, I told my parents I was quitting school, and got a tattoo of the moment so I would never forget it. And I didn't end up quitting nursing school, but I did graduate and saved my money, and then I went to go travel, which is the experience I had. I was like, I need to go travel the world. I need to go see what's out there. There's more for me than working a 9-to-5 and doing what everybody around me is doing. And ultimately, it just led me to want to follow my intuition and to have that connection where I actually felt really led by God. And I would say when I traveled the world and went on that journey and really learned to listen to my intuition is when I found my path and my connection to God. And yeah, I think right now I'm not currently actively using any psychedelics. I would say right now I'm really practicing on my more internal practices and meditation and how to integrate what I have learned and taken from that. Because I do think in psychedelics, that is one of the most important things, is how do you integrate what you saw? How do you put what you learned to practice every single day? Because you can have a direct insight, but it won't last if you don't put in the hard work after that. And I think that's kind of where I'm at right now in my life, is just really trying to put in the work day to day and my moment to moment of the awareness that I do believe I gained from psychedelics and my travels.
Absolutely. Just to piggyback what off Brooke said, yeah, that's the difference, I think, in my opinion, between recreational and intentional use. Intentional use is understanding psychedelic is the medium, the highway to get somewhere, and then once you get the lesson learned, apply it. Versus recreational, it was like a really fun ride. Let me go back on the ride. Let me go back on the ride. And it wasn't, my opinion, wasn't really meant for that. And then to explain my personal use, I didn't start off with recreational. I started much later in life, older. So I had time to reflect on that. My first experience, I went to Somalia, and the central area called Mudug. There's some sand dunes near there. Some relatives, we went on a 4x4. We were just having fun. It's camping, but they don't call it camping because they're pastoralists, right? So we do camp, we hike. That's just an average day for someone who lives in the backcountry. So we were going there. They had a Sufi circle, so they're getting this little house, no electricity, and I think my uncle used to use it. So he was like a Luddite. His worship he was anti-modernity before that was even cool. And so we'd go to those houses, a bunch of men getting stand in a line in a circle. Someone takes out the frankincense. They start chanting, boom, boom, back and forth, movement, unison. And I know there wasn't any psychedelics used, but I had an out-of-body experience. I was like, what's going on? First time it happened, it kind of shocked me. I ran home, tried to wait for the internet, call my parents. I'd say, what's going on? And then she kind of laughed. And then so I went back. But that was my first experience, and then I kind of intentionally used more and more of different type of mind-altering just to gain understanding of self. But yeah, that's my personal use. And then for the sake of time, we covered personal use, first experiences, impact on faith.
I feel like at the time that I first started using psychedelics, and before then, like before that point, I was just kind of in a period of like disassociative depression for years, it felt like. And I feel like that was the first time, I think the first time that I could feel God, it felt like in a very long time, was my first experience with specifically mushrooms. So I feel like that has been able to, how has that impacted my faith? Well, I know God is very real now. That's pretty cool. And also, I don't still believe in like the God of just like shame and guilt. I feel like, I think for me, a God that has created an eternal hell. That was one of the big things. It felt like growing up, it was like, you stole the Skittles, you're gonna burn forever, bro. Like, it sucks. And I feel like that just doesn't resonate anymore. It just doesn't. So I think it's impacted my faith a lot. I feel like when I do miss the mark, I'm not perfect. I feel like it's made me be very okay with not being a perfect human.
Right on. Brooke?
Yeah, I would say that my first experiences with psychedelics, I didn't use the language God. I used to have more of an aversion to that term. I wasn't really raised on any faith. I had a lot of questions, and my life path has been really my own exploration in that. But I feel like that was the moment that I would say opened my consciousness, and I really strongly believe it is what has led me down the path to my lived experience and relationship with God that I have now. And I definitely seek communication with God in other means daily. And I do believe that, yeah, psychedelics are to be used with great consciousness and awareness and reverence to the plant. And I think that's when we can really make contact with those parts of ourselves and whatever our faith or belief in any type of guidance is. And yeah, I would say it's strongly impacted me in a really powerful way.
Ditto. I couldn't agree more. As for me personally, I went from believing God to knowing Him through experience. You can only know that experience. So there's the way I see it is there's tribal God. There's different layers to relating to what they call the divine. Every culture, even someone who denies, might not believe in that stuff, you'll find that they're religiously irreligious. So there's some kind of divine, there's some kind of truth we all can relate to. We just have different relations. Some people are interested in the tribal God. I believe in this God because everyone around me, my community does. We have these rituals, we have Santa Claus, whatever. Some people, they're merchants worship, so it's, yeah, God, please give me money, give me security, give me this, give me that, and I'll believe in you. And then there's another level, which is you're seeking what in Arabic is called ihsan, or the sweetness of faith, which is to know, and you're just seeking that to have reunion or some kind of communion on the level beyond. And you can only go there really if you have some ability to transcend the material. So it changed. I was able to move up, levels in my relations with God. And that's pretty much the same for everyone who goes on this journey. We have certain terms and words for how we understand it, but cultures that are indigenous or less modern or prehistory, they all had a ritual. Right? No one had to go on their own to find this kind of experience. It was just, hey, you've come of age, and in our culture, this is what we do. You go to the man in the mountain or the woman in the mountain. You go meet the shaman, and this is what you do, and you learn. And those are different. They have those cultures and institutions in place that we don't have anymore, but it's pretty much the same story, and that's why we can relate to one another. And I feel like, and it's enhanced. It's given me a community, right, to find someone else who had this similar experience, and they might be completely different. He might grown up Buddhist, Hindu, whatever, but we connect up here at this level, and so it's completely changed my how I view myself. When we were kids, me and roommate, we were told that we're going to heaven, everyone's going to hell, and I'm sure we're not the only one, but life is not about collecting what I call Jannah bucks. Jannah's heaven, so you do enough good deeds, you collect the heaven bucks, and you cash them in. So, yeah, it's changed a lot for me. And then I think with that, we'd like to take some questions from the audience.
I think, though, I'll say one last thing. I feel like I credit mushrooms a lot and a little bit of LSD, but ultimately I feel like the goal is to lead you to not using it, I feel like. And I've had experiences where I've just like been breathing and doing like Dumo breathing throughout the way I've learned it from like Wim Hof, where it was like as potent as any psychedelic ever. And so I feel like the reliance on like outside medicine is not bad, but I think the point ultimately is to realize that you have the medicine already inside you. Yeah.
So, any questions from the audience, comments? Okay. I think I see someone's hand. Hi.
Hi. So I just wanted to ask, in a lot of Eastern cultures, obviously like our families or like our elders in particular don't really, they see like psychedelics or drugs in general as very taboo, obviously. And so how do you balance like your relationship with psychedelics with being close with your family or like having respect for your family?
Okay. I'll repeat back the question for those who didn't hear. She basically prefaced with the taboo-ness of this kind of topic within Muslim cultures and the way Muslim people practice. And so how do you balance keeping good relations with family while still, exploring this and being true? Did I get the question right? Roommate Brooke?
I don't want to go first.
Okay. So me and Brooke were just talking about this. There's a 100 years of ignorance that's been happening among Muslim cultures, where a lot of things have become taboo and they've become haram, forbidden. So the people's changed their religions, and not just become more religious, but have a completely unconscious doctrine. So psychedelics are viewed currently as not only forbidden, like you're a devil worshiper. There's a lot of negative connotations, and it depends on the family. So people who do this stuff, they got to keep it on the low for the most part. However, there's some silver lining because now scholars or clerics who have large followings, because they get to look at the rules like a jurist and they say, okay, boom. They say this stuff can be used medicinally if it can help people, it can benefit people. So there is currently precedent so that if this substance is able to help someone medically, then it's not bad. And then from there, I'm sure it won't be long before they say if they can help someone spiritually. Beyond that, people have to keep in mind is that with this changing of religious attitudes, the biggest consequence has been traditional or indigenous practices within those Muslim countries that have been wiped out. So up until like 100 years ago, people used to get cultural markings, what you would call tattoos here. It was very common for people in India to use hashish or other mind-altering substances as a way of worship. And so that's been kind of sometimes put under the rug, other times completely banned, and in many cases has just been given a new PR, a new name. So these practices actually do stay alive in more rural areas by giving it a new name. They'd add an Islamic and Arabic name and say, no, we're such and such. So they have survived. Beyond what we see as modernity today, it's a very superficial layer. And beyond it are still many old practices that have been given new name. Take for example, Christmas. They've Christianized a lot of pre-Christian pagan rituals that have survived. And that's how a lot of the old world has still survived. And I think it could make a comeback because a lot of Muslim people are tired of like the current way of, it seems coercive. Rumi, do you feel that way too? What are your thoughts?
The question was, how are you relating to your family even though you take something that's considered taboo? Personally, my family loves me. I feel like when I am on mushrooms, every time I've seen them, I've had conversations with them. They definitely have enjoyed my presence. I feel like a lot. I wouldn't share it with them. I think ultimately there's a fear. There's a major fear in them that it is a really powerful substance ultimately. And at the same time, so it should be revered and it should be approached, I think, with a little bit more, like I would say, like sacredness. But I think a little bit of its also power would lead some people to believe that it's considered like idol worship to an extent. Because it's like you're equating God with something else outside of God. And I imagine there's also a lot of clerics that would be very happy to have a lot of people never experience like psychedelics because it kind of keeps them in power. There's just a lot of people that just remain in power as long as people just stay unaware of what is actually real and what's not real. So unfortunately, the way that our also culture has also shifted after the war, it became very, very extreme, I feel like, to a certain extent. Because there were, I would say, like psychedelic elements in our culture before the war started, but now a lot of it has just become like very taboo to talk about. You like leave the folds. Either you're like on our side or you're on that side. Which again just leaves not a lot of room for doubt and questions. Yeah.
I kind of want to touch on what I've seen just with my background as a nurse. I used to work in a ketamine clinic. I think how mental health is viewed in a lot of religions is like bad. You're not worshiping enough. You're not praying enough. You're out of tune with God. And I think this is almost like a crevice that psychedelics may have snuck into, and it's starting to be more acceptable to get mental health help. And I can see, I've had a few Muslim patients there where it was a journey to talk to their parents about it. And once their parents were able to see like, oh, this is a mental health problem, you're really struggling. And then they start to accept it if this is something that can help you get better. But I think kind of what you said, I don't think it's really widely accepted to do it for connection to God. I would say most people say like, meditate more, pray more, like focus on those paths. And I can see that perspective of, you know, doing the work. Like we can have that experience, but you need to do the work every day in order to continue that presence and that connection. So, yeah.
Right on. We got time for one more question.
Thank you for having this courageous conversation. I know it's not the most easy to delve into territories that are sometimes like more personal and intimate, and so I appreciate your guys' willingness to share this piece with us. I think my question is really around your relationship to God, to the omnipresence that comes with the mushrooms, and really like if this has been a pathway in which you were able to like perhaps expand your concept. Because again, within Islam, within these Abrahamic faiths, there is like a rites of passage. There's ways of ordaining God. There's ways of relating. There are names of God that you invoke. There's rituals that you do in relation to it. So I'm curious if that has brought you closer within that faith tradition of like perhaps extracting that which is good, or has it kind of shattered illusions around God? Or perhaps it's some mixture of both. I'm just curious where you guys sit in relation to that omnipresence force. Now that you've experienced it, and you guys sit still within Islam.
Okay. For those of you here, I'll summarize. I'll do my best. It's powerful. I don't know if we have time to get to it all. Maybe one person could speak on it. But it was essentially, she was asking, for people with the Abrahamic faith or experience, how did experimenting with psychedelics change your concept or understanding of God in those? Or connection to?
Yeah. Has it brought you
Closer? Okay. I'm sure everyone heard that part. Okay. So when do you want to share your thoughts?
Talk.
Okay.
So before I came to the path of Islam, I followed an Indian religion that I came into while traveling. And I had 3 days in Hawaii where I was taking psychedelics, and I would say had the biggest form of coming to for myself. And at that time, it did cause me to sort of leave that faith a little bit. I loved the concept, the devotion, the rituals that it brought to me. But to me, I had reached something past that where I was seeing the box that it was keeping me in. And I would say now that I've come to the path of Islam and I have consistent prayers every day as best I can, and I have my own meditation practice, I would say that has been what has truly helped me to consistently believe in God. And that's what I go to lay down my prayers, to lay down my worries, to ask for guidance. And I think that's where I've started to really learn to trust myself. There's this quote that I saw from Rumi where it's like, if you want to trust God, learn to trust yourself, because he's within us and he's in our heart and accessible at all moments. And I think it's just finding what works for you to create that connection and that consistency to show up.
Very well put. With that, I think we came to an end of our time here, but so if anyone wants to share any closing thoughts, I thank everyone for their time. I will be out there if anyone wants to have conversation. The other panelists, I'm not sure what your schedule is, but it was great to speak here, and we learned a lot from being able to share our thoughts with y'all.
Thank you. And I'm also about to do a natural dye workshop over there, if you're curious about plant dyes.
Are you wearing some of your garments?
I'm wearing, yes, I made this. This is all naturally dyed. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the process, and then we're going to do a community project. I have a bunch of different plants and leaves, and we're going to make some prints on a fabric and hang it from a big stick. So if you're curious to learn more, come chat with me.